Thank you, Father. Thank you all. I hope you're all feeling good. I'm feeling great. Just over a year ago, I still feel too young for this, but I became a grandpa. Um, you're allowed to agree. Thank you. You're allowed to agree that I look too young for that. Thank you. So this was our eldest daughter who had a son, and his name is Owen. That's little Owen. And now I want to, so because it was just over a year ago, Owen has been learning to walk. And I'm going to show you a little video, a very short video of Owen taking his first steps. This isn't just proud grandpa show off. There's a point to this. So watch carefully, and there's Owen taking his first few steps, okay? Did you notice the intensity with which he takes every step, how much he concentrates? Let me show you again, this time in slow motion. Watch carefully. Watch every step. There we go. Okay, see that? Look, tongue between his teeth, right? Every step concentrating. Yeah, a lot of hard work in taking those steps. Why? Why such hard work? It's because at that stage, he hadn't yet developed the habit of walking. Yeah? But we know, you and I, soon enough, that once that habit of walking is established, he wouldn't give a second thought to every step. So from concentrating to every step to it's just, don't even think about it. And then before you know it, he's out there mowing the lawn for you, right? Wouldn't it be great if children could learn every habit that they needed for success in life in the same way that they learn how to walk? In other words, naturally. But they don't. They don't because there are habits of thought, of action and feeling that kids just don't learn, even though they are vitally important for making decisions, for relating to others, and for managing emotions. These are habits that have to be taught. They don't come naturally like walking does. And these habits were taught by pretty much every major civilization in history before ours, and even ours, but until recently. Until recently, when in the majority of schools, these habits are no longer being taught. As a result, in the same way that Owen had to really concentrate on every step that he took before he got the habit of walking, we see too many people, particularly young people, struggling with making decisions, relating to others, managing their emotions. Now, why does this matter? You might say, okay, so people have to struggle a bit to make a decision, or they have a struggle with their emotions, or struggle to establish relationships. I want to suggest to you that this matters very, very much, and that indeed it is a major root cause of many of the problems facing our society today. So poor decisions in their personal lives among young people lead to all kinds of catastrophic consequences, as we know. We also see what happens when they grow up in terms of poor decisions in business, poor decisions in government, all kinds of troubling consequences. The inability to establish and maintain human relationships is at the root of everything from the decline in marriage, with all of the terrible consequences that flow from that, to the great division in our country where neighbor hates neighbor because of just who you vote for. And then the very real pandemic of anxiety and depression, particularly among young people, is because of an inability to manage emotions. And it's all because these habits of thought, action, and feeling haven't been established. That's the root cause of these problems. Have you noticed among young people, if you're in a school, among your students, or if you run a business or an apostolate, among your young employees, just how fragile young people seem to be? Every time a difficult decision has to be made, it's a real struggle. Every time some relationship issue comes up, again, it's just like Owen with those kind of taking every step, it's a real battle. Or every time a strong emotion comes up, it's really, really hard for them. So it's just absolutely kind of draining every time one of these things happen. And these things happen throughout life. They are the very substance, in fact, of life. But look at this, even making a phone call can be a big deal for many young people. There was an article about this recently in the Wall Street Journal where they cited one young guy who has a pump-up song that he plays to get himself in the mood before he has to make a phone call, right? I mean, this is how fragile how people are. There's even a lady, she calls herself the phone lady. She'll give you training so you can overcome phone phobia for $480 an hour. It's a good business. So there's this basic set of habits of thought, action, and feeling largely missing from our society with terrible consequences. The good news is that they are being rediscovered in a number of places where human effectiveness is taken very seriously. Places like at the University of Pennsylvania, the Positive Psychology Center, where they call these habits character strengths. At the University of Michigan, they have a thing called the Center for Positive Organizations, where they call them positive traits. In consulting firms like Deloitte, they refer to them as capabilities. McKinsey & Company refers to them as distinct elements of talent. And then in a small number, very small number of colleges and universities, like my own, Catholic University and the Bush School of Business, where we call them by their real name. So what are they called, these habits of thought, action, and feeling? Somebody of you can see where I'm going with this, because there was a little hint in the title of the talk, which is, right. The word, of course, for these habits is virtues. And this is usually where it goes wrong. Because when most people, even good, well-formed, well-educated people, when they hear the word virtue, what they hear is this: a good person. So be virtuous means be a good person. It's as if I came to the Napa Institute to tell you to be good people. Right? What would your natural, reasonable reaction be if I came here and said, be good people, that the world would be a better place if we were all good people? It would be like Charlie Brown in class, right? Wah, 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 virtue, wah, 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 be good, wah, wah. And rightfully so, right? It's kind of vacuous. What am I supposed to do with that? All right, yeah, I'm trying to be good. What else do you want me to do, you know? So the problem is I think we are missing the point in a very important way, that virtues are a specific kind of habit. Each habit gives you literally superpowers. Virtues are a kind of a superpower habit, which is why I've taken to calling them super habits, like the virtue of gratitude. Virtue of gratitude is an example. Extensive scientific evidence about the virtue of gratitude, just kind of a number of the studies here that I'm showing, that show all kinds of really interesting things of what happens when you build the habit of gratitude. I'll give you just one example of a study. They took 60 people in 2 groups, and for about 2 months, they had one of the groups write a daily gratitude journal, something I'm grateful for at the end of each day. Proven way to build the habit of gratitude. And the other group just went on with their normal daily life. At the end of 2 months, amazing difference between the 2 groups, and the only difference being this gratitude journal. The first group felt happier in their lives. They also had a reduction in incidence of anxiety and depression, and they also had a reduction in chronic pain, just from growing in the virtue of gratitude. And in fact, if you look at all the research on gratitude, and there's quite a bit of it, you will find that as you grow in the habit of gratitude, not surprisingly, it makes you more effective at being grateful. It makes it easier to be grateful. It makes you happier, and it makes you healthier. But it's not just gratitude. So restraint, for example, is also a super habit, a virtue. The research shows that as you grow in the habit of restraint, you become more effective, not surprisingly, at restraining yourself. It becomes easier to restrain yourself, because whenever you grow into something as a habit, as you know, life gets easier, the thing gets easier, you get happier and you get healthier. Humility is also a virtue, a super habit, and there's extensive research on humility that shows that as you grow in the habit of humility, you become more humble. It becomes easier to become humble, and you get happier and you get healthier. Are you seeing a pattern here? This goes on and on and on across a multitude of virtues. But your reaction might be, okay, so that's good to know that grateful, restrained, humble people are happier, healthier, and more effective. But what about me if I tend to be ungrateful, impulsive, and just a little bit arrogant, right? That's just the way I am. And that is where you would be gravely wrong. Because, let me remind you, a virtue is a habit. And each virtue is a habit that anyone can acquire. So if you think that you are a disorganized person, it's not that you are a disorganized person because you have some genetic deformity. It's because you just haven't yet cultivated the habit of orderliness. And you can. Anyone can. If you think that you are not creative, it's not because God made you not creative, it's because you just haven't yet developed the habit of creativity. And you can. Anyone can. If you feel like you're overly cautious, that fear tends to rule your life, it's just because you have not yet cultivated the habit of courage. And you can. Anyone can. But how, you say, do we do this? Well, I'm glad you came, and I'm glad you asked. So there's some good, useful stuff in the field of habits, a series of books that you might have come across. One of them is called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. He's a New York Times columnist. Atomic Habits, this book has sold millions of copies by James Clear. And B.J. Fogg is a professor at Stanford. His book is called Tiny Habits. What each of these books show you is basically how to cultivate habits by making tiny changes. A little change repeated every day makes a big change in your life. The reason these books have been so popular is it's a real kind of life hack for improving your life by making tiny little steps and then just repeating them, okay? What these books don't tell you is which habits to grow in, because they just assume that whatever habit, it's fine. Fair enough, and so the books do what they do. We don't need to know because we already know. The habits to grow in are the virtues. And you can use the techniques in these books to grow in the virtues. So for example, I already talked about gratitude. If you thought, I want to become a more grateful person, I want to grow in the habit of gratitude, you start this by saying thank you more often, or you keep a gratitude journal. Or let's say, a little more difficult perhaps, you want to grow in the virtue of humility. A lot of leaders in this room, humility is occupational hazard for leaders, right? We struggle. We all struggle with humility. Here's a scientifically proven way for growing in humility. Every time you have a major decision to make, or a decision of any kind of consequence, you make a list of everything you don't know about that decision. Proven to help you grow in the habit of humility. Simple trick. Anyone can do this. Anyone can grow in the habit of humility. Part of what's going on here is what is referred to as neuroplasticity. So it's the rewiring of your brain through small and repeated changes. So it makes it easier and more likely that you'll do the thing further down the line. So this sort of practicing little things, exercises in humility or gratitude, actually makes you a more humble or a more grateful person by building up that habit. We can also call it what we've also called it, which is character development. Right? That's basically what's going on here. What every civilization before ours did, and what we are largely abandoning, and the terrible consequences of this are all around us. The human person needs this kind of formation, this formation in super habits or virtues, through repeated practice. And the beauty of it is, as you rewire your brain, it really does get easier to be effective, easier to be good. And this is desperately, I think, what our young people need. Now, it's not just a case of, okay, so I'm going to get me some of these super habits and life is going to be better. Yes, that is true, and that is certainly the case, but it's actually even bigger than that. Whatever is bothering you, whatever is the biggest struggle in your life right now, there is a virtue for that. There is a virtue for that, which if you grow in that virtue through making little steps, little changes, practice every day, your life in that area will become so much easier and better. Now, how can I say this? How can I say there's a virtue for every aspect of life? And the answer is in the genius of St. Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas shows us that there are different virtues for the different dimensions in life. He has a complete system, in fact. So remember those missing habits of thought, action, and feeling that I was talking about before? They are a central part of his system. So his system includes, of course, the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, also a set of intellectual virtues, and then there are a larger set of practical virtues, that kind of day-to-day living kind of virtues. And that's what I want to focus on today. So which are they? Aquinas observes that in our daily living, kind of setting aside, of course, the theological virtues always operating, intellectual maybe also, but just focusing on our day-to-day living, he observes that pretty much all day long, everything that occupies you can be categorized as thoughts, actions, or feelings. That's everything. If you think about your day-to-day living, that's pretty much what occupies you. Thoughts, actions, feelings, it's comprehensive. He then makes one extra step and he says, let's take those feelings and group them into the two kinds of feelings. There are feelings that push us away from things, we call those fears, and then feelings that attract us to things, we call those desires, right? They draw us in. Now this is where it gets cool. You've all heard of the 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. Did you ever wonder, why 4? Why these 4? Aquinas gives us the answer. He says prudence, or sometimes called practical wisdom, which is the virtue, the habit of making wise decisions, is what takes care of our thoughts. That's how we think well for the purpose of kind of making good decisions. Justice, the habit of treating others fairly, is what manages all of our actions. Fortitude or courage, the habit, it's not the habit of not having fear, that's impossible, right? Fear just comes. Fortitude or courage is the habit of moving forward despite being afraid. And it is a habit, and just like all the other habits, as you cultivate it, it gets easier. The fear remains, but it gets easier to move forward. So that's fortitude. And then temperance or self-discipline is the habit of only following our desires when it makes sense to do so, and that's the habit for managing our desires. So you see how the reason these 4, in fact, the reason we call them the reason these 4 are the kind of the 4 ones, the 4 cardinal virtues that we talk about, is because if you have those 4, you cover every aspect of daily life, right? Your thoughts, your actions, your feelings, you have them covered. Now this is clearly very intellectually satisfying, but if Aquinas stopped here, it would be of limited use. Because basically what I'm telling you is if you struggle with your desires, you should just get some more self-discipline. Like, yeah, thank you. I know that. But this is where Aquinas' genius really kicks in. He observes that each of those 4 cardinal virtues is allied to a number of smaller virtues, if you will, that are easier to develop than, say, self-discipline. That's why we call them cardinal. It comes from the Latin cardo, which means hinge or pivot. So these other smaller virtues pivot around the cardinal virtues. I'll give you an example. So courage, so the habit of moving forward even though you might be afraid, has 4 different allied virtues. One for each of 4 types of courage, of challenge that you might face in life. So Aquinas says, well, we can start by grouping the challenges you might face in life into ones that can be overcome and ones that must be endured. So challenges that can be overcome, it's a problem you face, you go at it and you overcome it, great. A challenge that must be endured is one that you cannot overcome just now, or maybe never. Maybe it's a chronic disease. You try to get it healed, you try to get better, you can't, you have to endure it. There are things like that in life, we know. He then takes the problems that can be overcome and groups them further into 2 groups and says, there are fundamentally 2 ways to overcome a challenge. And here you see just how darn practical Aquinas is. He says, you can do it through tremendous human effort or by spending lots of money. Very practical guy, huh? Or both in some cases. So the virtue for overcoming problems through human effort is the virtue of magnanimity. Comes from the Latin mania anima, means big soul. So it's the person who has a big soul, the habit of having a big soul, tackling a big issue, and taking down that big issue. For financial effort is the virtue of munificence, which is the habit of spending significant amounts of your wealth to solve a big problem. I think I say fairly accurately that both these virtues are in plentiful supply in this room. Magnanimity is the virtue of entrepreneurs, builders, leaders. Munificence is the virtue of great philanthropists. It's, I say, that willingness to give away significant sums of your own money for a good cause. I should highlight, of your own money. There isn't a virtue for giving away other people's money, just to clarify. Okay. And then in terms of challenges that have to be endured, Aquinas says we can split those into physical and mental. There are physical challenges we face, mental challenges. Physical challenges, I'm tired, a project needs to get done, but I'm exhausted, maybe I'm not feeling very well. the virtue of perseverance, right? It's the willingness, the habit of continuing to go on, even though you might be physically not up, feel like you're not up to the task. And then for mental challenges is the virtue of resilience, which is the habit of moving forward even though mentally you just don't feel like it's working. So you're suffering, say, from anxiety or depression. What is really interesting is, so the way, say, to grow in any of these is taking little steps. So the way to grow in resilience, let's say you're crippled with depression, for example, taking a little step, just getting out of bed, is often the best thing you can do for overcoming something like that. Because you start to take action, you start to rewire those pathways. Of course, all of this is presuming grace, of course, yeah? But another word for growing in the virtue of resilience is cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most successful treatments contemporaneously for growing in, for overcoming depression and anxiety, and Aquinas anticipated this by 750 years. So how does this help? If you're trying to grow in courage, you don't focus on courage itself. That's a heavy lift. You pick one of these 4 smaller virtues. Maybe you start with perseverance. And maybe the little practice you do every day is, I'm going to go 10 minutes longer than I normally would. Normally I would quit at a certain point because I'm tired and I'm done. I'm going to force myself to go 10 minutes longer. Anyone can do anything for 10 more minutes, you know? And you do that every day, and what you find is it starts to get easier. And then you've stretched that point kind of by 10 minutes, and you realize, okay, this stuff is elastic. This is the kind of thing we try to encourage our students to do. It makes it very, very real. And so then you grow in perseverance, which then contributes to your growth in courage. Maybe it's not entirely clear yet. Let me just give you one more example, this one for self-discipline. So self-discipline can be a really tough one, because where courage has 4 allied virtues, self-discipline has 15. And I'm going to go through all of them. So fair warning, this is going to be a little bit like drinking from a fire hose, okay? But here's the thing, you don't need to remember any of these because you have a handout in front of you, okay? And I'll explain the handout shortly. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, just sit back, enjoy the forest while Dean Abela names the trees. You don't have to remember the names of the trees. Okay, good. So how does Aquinas tell us to grow in self-discipline? How does he tackle it? So self-discipline, the super habit of dealing with the desires, the habit of only following your desires when they make sense to do so, Aquinas identifies 15 discrete or different types of desire. Here they are. So he says, okay, so 15 types of desire. We've got self-discipline. We have, so what are the 15? Again, he's grouping them. He says we have physical desires, like desires for nourishment, food and drink. We also have desires for sex, and we also have desires for things, possessions. He says we have desires for more things, and also for more, better, and kind of more luxurious things. Then we have non-physical desires, desires for what we want, and he said things we want to do. And of here he says there are things that we want to do that are petty or trivial, and there are also things that we want to do that are great. We also have desires to do great things, yeah? So the implication is that these desires aren't good or bad, they're just desires that we have, yeah? And then there's desires to know things. There's also desires to be in control. So to be in control in the moment when a situation, things aren't going the way we want, so we have a desire to get that right. But also desires after the fact. When something went wrong, it kind of keeps plaguing us. We know this, right? We wish there was some way to fix it. And then there's desires for how we want to live, how we want to work, how we want to play, how we want to move. And here even there's kind of movement and that has sort of social repercussions, and then movement that has physical repercussions, like slouching, for example, would have physical repercussions. And then finally desires for how we want to dress. So 15 discrete, different desires that human beings have. And Aquinas proposes 15 different virtues, one for each. So I'm going to take you through them quickly. Here comes the fire hose. Sit back, enjoy. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize any of these. Don't even bother taking a picture of it. It's all there in front of you on the handout. Okay, so what are they? There's the virtue of abstemiousness, which is the virtue, the habit of having right relationship to food, which means fasting when it's time to fast, feasting when it's time to feast, and then just being reasonable the rest of the time, eating just kind of what you need. Then there's, of course, the virtue of sobriety for dealing with drink, chasteness for dealing with reproduction, thrift for the desire for more things, contentment for the desire for more luxurious things, for the desire for petty things is the virtue of restraint, for the desire to do great things is the virtue of humility, for the desire to know things is the virtue of diligence, for the desire to be in control is the virtue of gentle firmness, which I guarantee you probably have never heard because I just made it up. And the reason I made it up, well, I made it up a year ago, but anyway, the reason I made it up is the word normally used is meekness, but I think for too many people, meekness sounds a little too much like weakness. But this virtue is a very tough virtue. It is a tough virtue, but is an in-control virtue. So when you're angry and you're able to use that anger to do good without losing control. So I call it gentle firmness because it's gentle and firm at the same time, easier to remember. And that's for dealing with bad situations in the moment when things are going wrong. When things have gone wrong in the past and you have anger eating you up inside about them, the virtue there is forgiveness. Right? That's the virtue for dealing with that. The virtue for work is the virtue of orderliness. For play is the virtue of eutrapelia, which is a Greek word that means good leisure, so having good leisure. For movement in social situations, the virtue of gravitas. For health is the virtue of suppleness. And then for dress is, of course, the virtue of modesty. Are you starting to see why it can be so hard to grow in self-discipline? Because if you're trying to grow or get one of your kids or students or employees to grow in self-discipline, you're basically asking them to grow in all 15 of these virtues at once. That's not easy. So instead what you do, instead of trying to grow in 15 virtues at once, just pick one. Pick one desire that you struggle with most, take the associated virtue, and just work on that. So let's say you struggle with kind of impulsivity, just work on restraint for a few days, few weeks, little practices you can do to kind of grow in restraint, and then that contributes to growing in self-discipline. I hope you're starting to see how the implications of this can be so enormous for ourselves, for our families, our schools, our organizations, our companies. So many problems facing our society today could be improved significantly if we could get particularly young people to start doing these little practices to help them grow in these virtues, and how you can use any of these to strengthen whatever organization you're running, whether it's a company or an apostolate or a school, anything, any human institution. If you're helping the people in that institution grow in virtue, the institution becomes more effective. We have evidence that companies become more profitable when you do this. This is really, really good, really important stuff. Now, you may be wondering, okay, this sounds like almost magic, and if this is so powerful, how come we've never heard about it? And the answer is you have actually heard about it, probably a lot. The only thing is you tend to hear about virtue from philosophers, and philosophers tend to be, philosophical. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a business dean, and so I'm very focused on the practicality of this. I just think it's supremely practical, really, really helpful. And I'm also a professor of marketing, so I'm here to sell you on the importance of virtue. I think we need a restoration of virtue in this country and in this world. It would fix so many of the problems. So there's so many of the problems that we face. There's a lot more to say, but I know that my clicker is running down there. Let me give you some ways to find out more if you're interested. So this evening, 6 p.m., right in the Vineyard Terrace, which is beside the swimming pool, we'll have a panel, President Kirkpatrick of Catholic University, Father Aquinas Gilbo, who runs our campus ministry, myself, on how we're doing this at Catholic University. So if you want to find out more in terms of detail, come be with us. October 16th in New York City is the day after the Eucharistic procession that Tim was telling you about this morning. So the day after, we have a day-long conference, which is our annual conference, joint Bush School and the Napa Institute. It's called the Faith and Business Conference, but this year it's all on the topic of the application of virtue in organizations and particularly in businesses. I'm also pleased to announce I have a book coming out called Super Habits, which is all about, so the book length of what I've just been talking to you about, going into detail into each of the different virtues. And it's published by Sophia Press, the wonderful publishers. You know them. Charlie McKinney is here. They're the head of Sophia. And I'm told that so the book comes out October 15th. but it is already available for pre-sale, just saying. And the folks at Sophia told me that if you use the word Super Habits 25, you get 25% off if you pre-order it today. And I just want to let you know, in the publishing business, the more pre-orders you get, the bigger a splash when they launch. So think about it. And Dean Abela, how do we pre-order your book? Thank you for asking. Here's a QR code. You could just hold up your phone right now. Go ahead, do it. And it'll get you to a page where, actually, there's a number of things on the page. We have a number of writings on super habits, virtues, and so on, organized in a Substack. If you're familiar with that, you can subscribe for free to that. And it's through the QR code. We're also experimenting with an app. So if you think you might be interested in exploring this app, there's a wait list to hear about the app. And there's also the link to the Sophia Press's website. Not seeing enough phones up, but I'm just... it will also take you to the Sophia Press website. And now let me tell you a little bit about the handout very quickly. So I talked about the 4 virtues, the allied virtues of courage, and I also talked about the 15 virtues, allied virtues of self-discipline. There are similar trees for justice, so the allied virtues of justice, things like honesty, gratitude, and so on, are the virtues allied to justice. And similarly for prudence or practical wisdom, like judgment, creativity, alertness, and so on, which are allied to, in fact, part of the virtue of practical wisdom. What we did is we combined them all onto one page, and in effect, kind of, check this out, really cool, we sort of blended them into this circle diagram. So the tree structure is now kind of in the shape of a circle, so you start with human life at the center, and then you move outwards, and it helps you choose which virtue, which super habit you would want to be working on right now. And they're sort of from noon, kind of 12 o'clock onwards down, roughly in the order that would be good to develop them. So each of you should have a copy of this. We call it the Anatomy of Virtue. If for some reason someone stole yours, they're very precious and high demand. We have extra ones at the Bush School table, so feel free to drop by there. We also have really neat Catholic U golf caps too at the Bush School table. So I think we may be handing some out afterwards, but feel free to drop by for that. So here's that QR code again. Did anyone mention I was a professor of marketing? So let me just sum up here. The super habits, the virtues, are superpowers that anyone can acquire just through simple daily practice that are proven to make life happier, healthier, more effective, even easier. Our world needs them desperately. Let's go do this. Thank you.